You ever given your child the world only to watch someone else try to take it all away? That's where my story begins, and I can still remember every detail of that moment as if it were yesterday. When my daughter Emily got married, I wanted to give her something that wasn't just a gift, but a foundation for her future, something that would carry memories long after I was gone. I wasn't interested in giving her a check that would be spent and forgotten, or a piece of jewelry that would sit in a box somewhere. I wanted to give her something alive, something that would hold laughter and footsteps, and the smell of fresh coffee in the mornings. I wanted to give her a home. I'd been saving for years, not just money, but ideas, visions of what that perfect gift could be. I remember the long drives on weekends, stopping by one real estate listing after another, walking through empty rooms and trying to imagine her in them. Some houses were too small, some too cold, some just didn't feel right. But then one day I found it. A villa with wide open windows, sunlight spilling into every room, and a porch that wrapped around like open arms. It wasn't just a house. It was a dream in brick and wood. The moment I stepped inside, I could picture Emily standing in the kitchen, maybe humming while she cooked breakfast, or sitting out on the porch with a book, her hair blowing in the afternoon breeze. I could see family gatherings, the smell of roasted turkey on holidays, children running through the halls, laughter echoing through the rooms. It was more than just property. It was a promise of a beautiful life. When I handed Emily the keys, her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, it felt like everything I'd ever worked for was worth it. "Mom, this is too much," she'd said, her voice shaking. But I just smiled, because no gift could ever be too much for the little girl who had once brought me dandelions from the yard and told me they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. I remember standing there in the front yard, the sun dipping low behind us, watching her walk through the door of that villa for the first time. It was her new beginning, a chapter I wanted her to start with hope and happiness. Rick, her husband, stood beside her, arm around her waist, smiling proudly. I wanted to believe he loved her as deeply as she loved him. I wanted to believe this man would protect her heart the way I always had. So when I looked at them standing there, newly married and glowing with that warm kind of joy only newlyweds have, I told myself I'd done the right thing. I'd given them something to build their life on. Everyone thought I'd gone a little overboard. Friends said, "A villa? Isn't that a bit extravagant?" But when you're a mother and you've watched your child grow from her first steps to her wedding day, you stop thinking in terms of practicality. You start thinking about love. You start thinking about all those years you promised yourself that when the time came, you'd give her everything she deserved and more. And so I did. I thought about all the small moments that had led us there. The scraped knees I'd kissed, the late nights helping her study for exams, the times I'd held her when her heart was broken. This house, this villa, it wasn't just walls and windows. It was my way of saying, "You made it, sweetheart. You've built your life, and now you have a place to live it fully." We spent the days before the wedding decorating the house, adding little touches that made it theirs. Emily chose pale cream curtains that danced in the wind, and I helped her plant roses along the front path. Rick picked out the dining table, big enough for family dinners, he said. And for once, I thought he had a good sense of taste. The villa seemed to hum with excitement, waiting for life to fill it. On the day of their wedding, everything was perfect. The ceremony was small, intimate, full of love. When they returned from the reception that night, tired but glowing, I felt peace settle over me. I thought to myself, this is how it's supposed to be. I remember sitting on my porch that night, watching the stars and thinking about Emily as a little girl. I could still see her in her favorite pink dress, twirling in the yard, her laughter ringing out as she shouted, "Look, Mommy! I'm dancing!" That same joy had been in her eyes earlier that day when she said her vows. I thought about how far she'd come, how strong and kind she'd become, and how proud I was of the woman she'd grown into. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every worry, it all felt worth it in that moment. I'd imagined the villa becoming the heart of their new life. I could see them hosting holiday dinners, filling the rooms with music, cooking together on lazy Sunday mornings. Maybe someday there'd be little feet running down those stairs, giggles coming from the garden as they played under the sun. I imagined birthdays with too many candles and anniversaries celebrated under twinkling lights on that wraparound porch. It was more than a home. It was the beginning of a family legacy. When I looked at Emily that night, sitting beside Rick, holding hands and laughing softly, I felt a warmth in my chest that words couldn't describe. Every parent dreams of seeing their child happy, safe, and loved. That was all I ever wanted. I wanted her to have stability, comfort, and a place that was truly hers. A place she could fill with her laughter and love. A place where she'd always belong, no matter what happened in life. I thought about all the things she'd gone through. The heartbreaks, the setbacks, the times she doubted herself, and I felt proud knowing she'd finally found someone to share her life with. Rick had always seemed polite, maybe a bit too smooth, but he made her laugh, and that was enough for me. When I saw them together, I wanted to believe that they'd grow together, face the world as partners. I thought maybe this time, love would be kind to her. Buying that villa wasn't just about money or luxury. It was about giving Emily something that no one could take away. A home built on love, effort, and dreams. The moment I handed her those keys, I felt like I was handing her the future. I wanted her to walk through that front door and feel a sense of peace she'd never felt before. I wanted her to build a life full of warmth, laughter, and love in every room. I remember telling her, "This house isn't just a gift, it's a beginning." And she'd hugged me so tightly that I could feel her heartbeat against mine. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. "I'll make you proud." And I believed her. Because she always had. I could almost see her and Rick sitting together on that porch 10 years from now, sipping coffee, surrounded by blooming flowers and the hum of life all around them. I could picture her calling me on the phone, telling me how happy she was, how much she loved the villa, and how grateful she was for the life she was building there. That was the dream that carried me through all the years of hard work. That was the picture I wanted to keep in my heart forever. It's funny how a single decision can carry so much love, so much meaning. When I bought that villa, I thought I was securing her happiness. I thought I was giving her a gift that would keep on giving. And maybe in that moment, as I watched her smile and turn the key in the lock for the very first time, I believed with all my heart that everything was exactly as it should be. The morning after the wedding was supposed to be peaceful, filled with the soft laughter of newlyweds starting their first day together in their new home. Instead, I was greeted by the rumble of tires on gravel, the screech of a van door opening, and the unmistakable chorus of loud voices echoing across the garden. I stepped out to the veranda, clutching my cup of coffee, only to see a small convoy pulling up the driveway. At first, I thought perhaps it was some leftover catering service. Maybe someone had forgotten their equipment. But when I saw Rick jump out of the front seat with a wide grin and wave toward the approaching vehicles, my stomach sank. Behind him came his mother, a woman I'd met briefly at the wedding. Sharp eyes, louder than the band, and perfume so strong it seemed to travel before she did. Then came two of his sisters, dragging suitcases and boxes like they were moving into a dormitory, and finally, his brother, holding a giant bird cage with a squawking green parrot that kept yelling something that sounded suspiciously like mine. Emily appeared at the doorway, still in her nightgown, blinking as if she too couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Rick turned to her with that easy charm of his and said something about how family was everything. How his folks couldn't wait to spend time with them in their beautiful new home. He called it their home, not Emily's, not mine, and that one word hit harder than I expected. Before I could even speak, his mother was already marching past the gate, directing people where to unload furniture as if she were running a moving company. The sisters laughed loudly, dragging their suitcases up the steps, and one of them called out, asking which room had the biggest closet. Rick just grinned, told her to take her pick. Emily tried to object. A faint, "Rick, wait! What's going on?" escaping her lips, but he brushed her off with a quick kiss and a, "Don't worry, babe, it's just temporary." Within minutes, the villa that had felt so peaceful and full of promise was transformed into chaos. Boxes piled up in the hallway. Someone turned on the TV in the living room loud enough to drown out conversation, and that parrot kept shrieking, "Mine! Mine!" as if mocking us all. Rick's mother started giving orders to Emily about where to put the dishes, how to rearrange the kitchen, and even commented on how unpractical the decor was. I watched my daughter's expression, that soft, newlywed glow replaced by confusion and discomfort. She kept glancing at Rick, silently asking for support, but he was too busy joking with his brother about where to set up a game console. By noon, the house was unrecognizable. Rick's mother had claimed the master bedroom for a few days because she said her back couldn't handle small beds. His sisters had taken over the guest rooms, leaving Emily and Rick to squeeze into a smaller room, for now. The dining table was cluttered with half-unpacked boxes, plastic containers, and cups of instant coffee. The smell of fried food and cheap air freshener filled the air. I tried to remain polite, but every time I opened my mouth, Rick's mother would talk over me, as though I were a stranger in my own daughter's home. When I mentioned that Emily might need some space to settle in as a newlywed, she laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Oh, sweetie, family always comes first. You'll understand when you're older." Emily followed me into the kitchen at one point, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I didn't know they were coming," she said, her hands trembling as she tried to make coffee for everyone. I could tell she was embarrassed, torn between her love for Rick and her discomfort with the situation. I wanted to tell her to put her foot down, to remind her that she had every right to her own home, but the words stuck in my throat. She was glowing just yesterday, full of excitement and love, and I didn't want to be the one to cast a shadow over her happiness so soon. So instead, I helped her slice fruit and pretended not to notice that Rick's mother had already started reorganizing the pantry. By evening, it became clear that this wasn't a temporary visit. Rick's brother brought in a mini fridge from the van and set it up in the hallway. His sisters unpacked suitcases filled with clothes, and his mother began hanging family photos on the walls, right over the art Emily had chosen so carefully. When I asked Rick how long they were planning to stay, he smiled casually and said, "Just until they find a place nearby. You know, family wants to stick together." His tone was so casual it was infuriating, as if this invasion of privacy was the most natural thing in the world. I looked at Emily, hoping she would speak up, but she just smiled weakly and nodded. Dinner was a spectacle. Rick's mother insisted on cooking, though she barely let Emily near the stove. She criticized the ingredients, complained about the cookware, and bragged about how she made better meals for Rick growing up. At one point, the parrot started mimicking her laughter, which made everyone roar with laughter except Emily and me. Rick seemed completely unfazed, almost proud, as if his family's presence was some sort of blessing. I sat there, watching my daughter's forced smile, the exhaustion behind her eyes, and I realized this wasn't just about an unexpected visit. This was a power shift. The villa that had been a gift from me to Emily had somehow become a trophy for Rick's family. Later that night, when most of them had gone to bed, I found Emily sitting alone on the porch. The moonlight caught the tears she was trying to hide. She said softly, "I don't want to cause problems. Mom, maybe it's just for a few days." I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew families like Rick's didn't move out easily once they got comfortable. From inside the villa came the muffled sound of Rick laughing with his brother, his mother shouting something about towels, and the parrot's voice echoing again, "Mine! Mine!" It was almost prophetic, the way that bird claimed everything around it. I walked through the house one more time before leaving that night. The framed pictures of Emily and me that once hung in the hallway were replaced with Rick's family portraits. The scent of my daughter's candles was overpowered by the smell of cheap perfume and fried food. Her wedding bouquet, once proudly displayed in a vase, was now shoved to the side of the counter to make space for someone's curling iron. I paused at the door, taking it all in, the noise, the clutter, the uninvited presence that had swallowed up every corner of what was supposed to be a sanctuary. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a battleground disguised as family hospitality, and Emily didn't even realize she was already losing ground. Days turned into weeks, and what was meant to be a short family visit quietly rooted itself into permanence. The villa, once filled with light and laughter, now echoed with constant noise, the sound of televisions blaring in different rooms, pots clanging in the kitchen, and arguments breaking out over the smallest things. Emily, who had always been gentle and optimistic, began to fade like a flower left too long in the sun. Her morning started earlier than everyone else's, and her nights ended last. I would visit and find her already sweeping the front porch, while Rick's sisters lounged inside scrolling through their phones, asking her for coffee or breakfast, as if she were staff. She never complained, not once. She smiled politely, nodded, and carried on as though this was normal life. But her eyes told another story. Dull, tired, robbed of the spark that once made her seem unshakable. Rick had changed too. Gone was the affectionate husband who used to hold her hand in every photo, the man who promised to protect and cherish her. He had grown smug, almost careless. He started spending long evenings drinking beer with his brother, laughing about women and their moods, while his mother would sit nearby giving Emily subtle instructions: where to store the dishes, how to fold the laundry properly, how to make Rick's favorite meals, the way I used to. Every time Emily tried to assert herself, she was met with a mocking laugh or a gentle scolding from Rick, telling her not to make a big deal out of nothing. I watched from the sidelines, helpless, every visit feeling heavier than the last. The home I'd given as a symbol of freedom was becoming a prison. Rick's mother had practically taken over the master suite and even redecorated it with her own bedding and curtains. She called it temporary comfort, but weeks later, she was still there. Rick's sisters had begun inviting friends over, using the pool like it was a resort, leaving towels and soda cans scattered across the deck. Emily would quietly clean up after them, her hair tied back, her hands red from detergent. She moved through the house like a ghost, unseen, unappreciated, and too polite to demand respect. When I told her she needed to set boundaries, she just smiled faintly and said, "It's just easier this way. Mom, I don't want Rick to think I'm causing tension." Her voice was small when she said it, like someone who had already learned that speaking up only made things worse. I could see the toll it was taking. Her once flawless skin now pale, dark circles blooming under her eyes. Even the way she dressed had changed. She used to love light dresses, soft colors, little details that made her feel radiant. Now she wore plain clothes, neutral colors, practical fabrics. It wasn't modesty, it was exhaustion. She didn't have the energy to be herself anymore. One afternoon, I dropped by unannounced, carrying some homemade soup and fruit. When I walked in, I found Emily scrubbing the kitchen floor while Rick's mother sat at the table painting her nails. The television blared from the living room, Rick's brother shouting at a sports game, and the parrot screaming the same dreadful word over and over. Mine! Mine! It felt like the house itself was mocking her. I set the soup down and knelt beside her, taking the sponge from her hand. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," I whispered. She shook her head quickly, glancing toward the table. "Mom, please don't. It'll just cause more trouble." The fear in her voice made my stomach twist. This wasn't the daughter I'd raised. This was someone trapped in politeness, afraid of setting off the smallest spark. Rick's attitude toward her grew colder, almost dismissive. He began correcting her in front of others, calling her too sensitive when she expressed frustration, or joking about how she wasn't used to real family life. It was cruel, the way he made her feel small with a smile. Once, during dinner, she accidentally burned the edge of a casserole. Rick's mother rolled her eyes and muttered, "Guess we know who didn't inherit her mother's skills." And Rick just laughed instead of defending her. Emily said nothing. She just lowered her head, wiped her hands on her apron, and quietly made herself a plate after everyone else had eaten. At night, when the house finally quieted down, she would sneak outside to sit on the patio. I caught her there once, sitting alone with a blanket over her shoulders, staring out at the garden lights. "I don't even recognize this place anymore," she murmured. "It doesn't feel like mine." I wanted to tell her it didn't have to be like this, that she had the power to take back control, but I could see how broken she was. Every ounce of confidence she'd ever had been chipped away piece by piece, not by shouting or violence, but by the constant drip of subtle disrespect. The emotional distance between her and Rick grew more obvious. He stopped coming home early. Sometimes he'd roll in past midnight, reeking of alcohol and cheap cologne, muttering excuses about late work meetings. Emily would wait up, sitting in the dim light of the living room, her wedding ring glinting faintly as she twisted it around her finger. I'd find her the next morning trying to hide the puffiness in her eyes with a smile that no longer reached her cheeks. She started to lose weight, not because she wanted to, but because stress had stolen her appetite. Even the parrot, that obnoxious bird, seemed to sense her quiet suffering. It had started imitating her sighs, long and low, between its usual cries of "mine." When I finally confronted Rick during one of my visits, he brushed it off with a laugh. "You know how women are," he said, smirking. "Emily's just adjusting. She'll be fine." I told him that what he called adjusting looked a lot like breaking, but he shrugged. "Mom's just helping her learn how to run a proper household. It's tradition." The arrogance in his tone made me want to scream. I realized then that he didn't see Emily as a partner. He saw her as someone to mold, someone to manage, like she was part of the furniture. Every time I left that villa, I felt like I was abandoning her. "But she wouldn't leave with me. It's my home, Mom," she'd say softly. "I just need to make it work." That sentence haunted me. She still called it her home, even as it was slowly being taken from her in every imaginable way. The villa that was meant to symbolize love and independence had become a stage for humiliation, and yet she stayed, not because she was weak, but because she believed love meant enduring. She believed that with enough patience and kindness, things would change. But kindness doesn't heal what people do deliberately, and patience only feeds those who take advantage of it. Each visit grew harder for me. I started noticing the smallest things: how Emily flinched when Rick raised his voice, how she hesitated before speaking her mind, how her laughter had become something quiet and careful. She no longer hummed while cooking or danced in the kitchen like she used to. The light in her eyes that once made her seem unstoppable was now just a faint flicker, like a candle trying to survive in a storm. I began to realize that this wasn't just a family overstepping boundaries. It was slow erosion, the kind that turns a bright, confident woman into someone who apologizes for existing. The day I finally broke my silence came quietly, without warning, like a slow tide pulling back before a storm. I woke up that morning with a heaviness I couldn't shake, a knot in my chest that had been building for weeks. The last time I had seen Emily, she had looked smaller somehow, as if the walls of that villa had been closing in on her. Her shoulders slumped when she walked, her voice carried no conviction, and when she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. I had left that day feeling powerless, angry at myself for giving her that house, for believing that love alone could protect her. But love, I was beginning to understand, without boundaries, without courage, can be a cage disguised as devotion. I spent the morning pacing through my own kitchen, every corner reminding me of her laughter, her presence, the girl who used to fill a room with warmth. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would sort itself out. The truth was gnawing at me. Emily wasn't just being mistreated, she was being erased. Piece by piece, word by word, and I had done nothing but watch. I picked up the phone and called Linda, an old friend who had once helped me through my divorce years ago. She was smart, calm, and ruthless when she needed to be. When she answered, I didn't even know where to start. My voice trembled as I told her about Rick's family, about how they had taken over the villa, how Emily had become their servant. She didn't interrupt. She just listened quietly until I was done, and then, in her no-nonsense tone, she said, "Who owns the deed, Sarah?" The question hit me like a slap. "I do," I said, almost breathless. I'd bought that villa outright in my name as a wedding gift, planning to transfer it to Emily later. I hadn't thought it mattered. She was my daughter, after all, and Rick seemed like a decent man back then. Linda's tone sharpened. "Then it's not their house. It's not even his. It's yours. You can end this." The simplicity of those words stopped me cold. I had been so consumed by guilt and sorrow that I had forgotten something so basic, so powerful. The law was on my side, and by extension, Emily's. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. Not quite anger, not yet hope, but clarity. We met that afternoon at her office. Linda was all business, flipping through papers, her glasses perched low on her nose. "You've got two options," she said, tapping her pen. "You can confront them informally, give them a warning, or you can go through legal channels. But one way or another, You need to take control. This isn't just about property. It's about your daughter's safety and dignity." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly as I signed a few documents she prepared. Notices, statements, proof of ownership. She explained what each one meant, but I was barely listening. My mind was already at the villa, picturing Emily's tired face, the way her hands shook when she poured tea. I could feel the heat of anger rising now, not reckless rage, but something steady and clean. A mother's fury dressed in calm. I drove to the villa late that evening, the sun setting low behind me, casting long shadows across the road. My heart thudded in my chest as I pulled into the driveway. The familiar stone archway, once a symbol of pride, now felt like the entrance to a stranger's house. I could hear voices before I even stepped inside. Laughter, music, and that parrot shrieking again. "Mine, mine!" It was like the universe itself was taunting me. Inside, chaos reigned as usual. Rick's sisters were sprawled on the couch. His brother rummaged through the fridge, and his mother was seated in my daughter's living room, watching a soap opera like a queen on her throne. Emily was in the kitchen, of course, her apron tied tight, her face pale under the harsh lights. When she saw me, her eyes widened with a mix of surprise and fear. She wiped her hands on her apron and rushed to me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she whispered urgently. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she glanced toward Rick, as if she were bracing for his reaction. He turned from the dining table, half drunk and smirking, his voice casual but laced with arrogance. "Hey, Mom-in-law," he said. "Didn't know we were expecting guests." His mother laughed softly from the couch, murmuring something about unannounced visits. I ignored them all and focused on Emily. I spoke softly but firmly. "We need to talk. Privately." Rick immediately objected, but I met his gaze with a calmness that seemed to unnerve him. "It's about the house," I said, and for the first time silence fell over the room. The word house had weight now, heavier than any insult or argument. His mother turned the TV down, her eyes narrowing, sensing a shift. Emily followed me out to the patio, her hands fidgeting, her voice trembling. "Please don't start anything, Mom. I can handle it." I shook my head. "You shouldn't have to handle it. This isn't your burden." She opened her mouth to protest again, but I stopped her with a look. "I'm not asking, Emily. I'm telling you. Things are going to change." Her lips parted in confusion, fear flickering behind her eyes. But before she could ask more, Rick appeared in the doorway, his expression tightening. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his tone falsely pleasant. I turned to face him fully, my hands steady now. "Rick," I said evenly, "I've spoken to my lawyer. The villa is still in my name. Legally, it's my property." His smirk faltered for the first time. I continued, my voice firm but quiet, every word cutting through the heavy evening air. "I was generous enough to let you two live here as newlyweds. But I didn't agree to house your entire family." His mother stood up abruptly behind him, indignant, her voice rising. "You can't talk to us like that. This is our home now." I turned to her slowly, and the years of restraint in me snapped cleanly. "No, it's not," I said. "You've mistaken hospitality for ownership. That ends today." Rick started to argue, to bluster, to make excuses about how they just needed time, how Emily had agreed to let them stay. Emily tried to speak to calm things down, but I held my ground. "I've already spoken to my attorney," I said quietly. "You'll all receive notice within the week. 30 days. That's more than fair." His mother gasped. Rick swore under his breath, and Emily's hands flew to her mouth in shock. But beneath that shock, I saw something else flicker in her, something fragile, something long buried. Relief. The room behind them buzzed with whispers. Rick's sisters exchanged looks. The brother muttered something about finding another place, and even the parrot had gone silent. Rick's mother, red-faced, tried to insult me, throwing out words like heartless and selfish, but I barely heard her. I was too focused on Emily, who was standing frozen by the doorway, her eyes filling with tears. She looked torn between loyalty and liberation, between love and the painful truth. When I finally turned to leave, the villa felt different, still noisy, still chaotic, but the air had changed. The illusion of control Rick's family had built was cracking. I could see it in the way they avoided my gaze, in how Rick's bravado faltered. As I stepped outside, the night air hit my face, cool and sharp, and I realized that this was the first step. The storm had been coming for a long time, and I was done waiting for it to pass. The days following that confrontation were filled with a silence heavier than any argument. The once constant noise of Rick's family, the laughter, the shouting, the clatter of dishes, seemed to dull, as if the entire house was holding its breath. Word had spread quickly among them that I had taken legal action, and the tone in the villa shifted from arrogance to unease. The sisters avoided eye contact. Rick's brother stayed out most of the day, and even his mother, once loud and commanding, had started moving around the house with a stiffness that betrayed her discomfort. Emily, however, was a storm of emotions. She called me several times, torn between gratitude and guilt, her voice trembling as she said she didn't want to make things worse. I reminded her gently that she hadn't made this decision. I had. And I wasn't doing it to punish anyone, but to free her from a situation she should never have been trapped in. On the morning of the so-called family meeting, I arrived early, wearing the same calm expression I had practiced in the mirror all night. The documents were in my bag, neatly folded, every signature carefully placed. I wasn't there to argue anymore. I was there to finish what had started the day I gave my daughter that villa. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the garden, but the tension was thick enough to taste. Emily opened the door, her face pale, her hair hastily tied back. "They're all here," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Rick's in a mood." I placed a hand on her arm and gave a reassuring squeeze. "Let him be in one," I said softly. Inside, the family was gathered like a tribunal. Rick sat at the head of the table, his mother beside him, both wearing expressions that hovered between defiance and fear. The others sat quietly, pretending to look unconcerned but clearly uneasy. Rick leaned back in his chair as I entered, a smirk tugging at his lips. "So," he said, his tone dripping with mockery, "you've come to evict us, huh? Going to kick your own daughter out too?" His mother chuckled bitterly beside him, muttering something about ungrateful people. I ignored the bait, setting the envelope of documents down on the table with quiet precision. "This isn't about eviction," I said evenly. "It's about restoring what was never yours to take." Rick snorted. "We're family," he said. "You gave this house to Emily. We're her family now. That makes it ours." I met his gaze without flinching. "I gave this villa to my daughter as a gift of love, not to fund your entire household. And legally it was never transferred. It's still mine. You've been living here as guests. Nothing more." His mother's voice rose, high and shrill. "You can't just throw family out like garbage. We've built a home here. We've made improvements." I turned to her slowly, my tone still calm but colder now. "You've built chaos. You've stripped my daughter of her peace, her confidence and her joy. That's not family. That's entitlement." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the parrot screeching in the background, its voice strangely hoarse, as if even it had grown weary of shouting, "Mine." Rick's sisters exchanged nervous glances. His brother shifted in his seat, mumbling that maybe it was time they found their own place. Rick's mother shot him a glare, but even she could sense the tide had turned. Emily stood quietly by the kitchen doorway, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. I could see the conflict in her, loyalty and shame warring with the flickering spark of something long forgotten, relief. I opened the folder and began laying out the papers. "You have 30 days to vacate," I said, sliding one of the documents across the table. "This gives you ample time to make other arrangements. You'll find that I've even included contact information for a realtor who specializes in short-term rentals nearby. You won't be without options." Rick's mother scoffed, her voice dripping with venom. "You're heartless. Do you know how humiliating this is for us?" I met her glare head-on. Not as humiliating as watching my daughter serve dinner to people who treat her like a maid in her own home. Rick stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You think you can just waltz in here and control everything?" He snapped, his voice rising. "Emily's my wife. She's happy here. She wants us here." He turned to her, his expression shifting into something softer but manipulative. "Tell her, Em. Tell your mom you're fine." Emily froze, her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, in a voice so soft it barely carried, she said, I'm not fine, Rick. The room went still. Rick blinked, his jaw tightening. His mother started to speak, but Emily cut her off, her voice trembling now. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I can't do this anymore. Rick's expression darkened. Don't be dramatic, he muttered, but Emily didn't stop. You said this would be temporary, that your family just needed a few weeks. It's been months, Rick. They've taken over everything, my home, my time, my peace. Her voice broke then, and she pressed a hand to her chest as if steadying herself. I love you, but I can't live like this. For a moment, Rick looked at her as though he didn't recognize the woman standing before him. His smirk faded completely. The air shifted again, heavier now but clearer. Rick's mother started crying, loud, exaggerated sobs that filled the silence. But nobody rushed to comfort her. His sisters looked away. His brother sighed heavily and muttered something about packing. The parrot, as if on cue, flapped its wings and shrieked again, but this time, instead of mine, it mimicked Rick's voice saying, Don't be dramatic. It was almost comical, the absurdity of it all. Emily let out a shaky laugh, half disbelief, half release. Rick shot the bird a glare, muttered a curse, and stormed off down the hall, slamming a door behind him. I didn't move. I just stood there watching the shift unfold in real time. The once unshakable empire Rick's mother had built inside that villa was crumbling. The illusion of control, of permanence, was dissolving under the weight of reality. Rick's sisters quietly began gathering their things, whispering among themselves. His brother unplugged the television. Even the parrot fell silent for a while, as if sensing the end. When it was over, when the voices had dulled and the house had emptied of chaos for the first time in months, Emily stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and fading echoes. Her eyes were red, her hands still shaking, but she looked lighter somehow, as if she had finally exhaled after holding her breath for too long. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught her face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimmer of the girl she used to be. She turned to me, her lips parting as though to speak, but I only nodded, silently telling her she didn't have to say anything yet. As the day went on, the house slowly began to reclaim itself. The noise faded, the clutter thinned, and with every piece of furniture that left, the villa seemed to breathe again. The scent of cheap perfume gave way to fresh air. The sound of laughter, once cruel and careless, was replaced by soft music playing from Emily's phone. The birdcage sat empty in the corner, the echo of its former occupant lingering like a strange ghost of all that had gone wrong. The garden outside was overgrown, but in the fading afternoon light, even that looked like a promise, something that could be tended, renewed, brought back to life. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the villa had fallen quiet. Rick's car was gone, his family's laughter now just a memory fading down the long driveway. Emily stood by the window, her reflection framed by the soft glow of the setting sun, her eyes distant but no longer lost. There was still so much to face, so much to rebuild, but the silence around her wasn't suffocating anymore. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that comes after a long storm, when the air is finally clear and the sky is wide open. That night, long after the noise had faded and the last car lights disappeared from the driveway, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the soft hum of silence that felt almost sacred. The villa seemed to have exhaled, as though it too had been holding its breath through all those months of tension and intrusion. The furniture was no longer draped with clothes that weren't ours, no dishes piled up from people who never said thank you, no arguing voices bouncing off the walls. The quiet was strange at first, unnerving even, but beneath that strangeness was a calm I hadn't felt in years. Emily had gone to bed early, exhausted, her face still drawn but peaceful. I could tell her mind was running in circles, replaying everything that had been said, everything that had been lost and regained, and though she didn't say it, I knew she was scared of what would come next. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the tables, the corners that had been hidden behind other people's belongings. It was astonishing how different a place could feel when it was truly yours again. The faint scent of lavender from Emily's diffuser drifted through the hallway, mingling with the crisp scent of the open windows. The curtain swayed gently, whispering against the night breeze. I found myself remembering the first time I saw this villa. How I had fallen in love with its sunlight, its quiet strength, the way the morning light pooled on the floor like spilled gold. I had imagined Emily and Rick building a life here, imagined laughter, warmth, children one day. I hadn't imagined this, the fights, the shouting, the humiliation. But perhaps that's how life worked. What you imagined was never what you got, yet somehow it led you to what you needed to see. As I stood in the kitchen, I noticed the parrot's empty cage still sitting in the corner. The silence from that spot felt almost symbolic. That ridiculous bird had been the perfect echo of everything wrong. A creature that only repeated, never listened. I smiled faintly, thinking how even its absence made the air feel freer. Emily had suggested giving it away, but I told her to wait a few days. Sometimes letting go wasn't just about removing something. It was about understanding what its absence taught you. I ran my fingers along the kitchen counter, tracing the scratches and stains left behind by months of careless hands. They would take time to clean, to repair, but there was something oddly comforting in that thought. That healing wasn't instant, but it was possible. Later, when I stepped outside onto the veranda, the night sky stretched endlessly above, heavy with stars. The air was cool, brushing against my skin like a reminder that time hadn't stopped for anyone. In the garden, the overgrown plants rustled softly, the jasmine still releasing its scent into the night. It smelled like beginnings. I sat down in the wicker chair that had always been mine when I visited, the one Rick's mother used to occupy with her loud laughter and sharper words. Now it was empty again, and the space around it seemed to expand, generous and unclaimed. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, without worry of who was watching or listening. Emily joined me after a while, her footsteps soft, her robe pulled tightly around her. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me, looking out at the stars. Her hair was slightly tousled, her eyes tired but clear. After a few moments, she whispered, "It feels strange without them." I nodded, understanding more than she knew. "It will," I said quietly. "Peace always feels strange at first when you've lived too long in chaos." She gave a small laugh, not quite a laugh, but the sound of someone remembering how to make one. "I thought I needed to keep the peace by keeping everyone happy," she said. "But I think I was just afraid of being alone." Her words lingered between us, raw and honest. I turned to her, seeing not the fragile girl who once called me crying, but a woman on the edge of her own awakening. "Being alone isn't the same as being lonely," I said softly. "Sometimes it's the only way to hear yourself again." She nodded, her gaze distant, thoughtful. The stars reflected in her eyes, and for a moment I saw the strength returning, the same quiet resilience I'd always known she carried deep inside. The wind stirred the jasmine again, and she inhaled deeply, as if trying to fill herself with something pure. "It smells like when I was little," she murmured. "When we used to sit here and watch the sky." I smiled. "That's because this is still your home. It always was. You just had to reclaim it." We sat there for a long time, not talking much after that. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was alive, breathing, patient. Every sound, the chirp of crickets, the whisper of leaves, the faint hum of distant traffic, felt like a piece of the world quietly settling back into place. I thought about Rick and his family, wondering where they were, what they were saying about us now. But for the first time, it didn't matter. Their absence wasn't a void. It was space. Space for Emily to heal, to rebuild, to remember who she was before she became someone else's servant in her own life. Inside, the clock ticked softly, each second marking the slow but steady passage into something new. Emily eventually stood, saying she was going to make tea. I watched her move, graceful again in her own space, and felt something uncoil in my chest. Pride, maybe, or relief, or both. When she returned with 2 steaming cups, she handed me one and sat back down, her fingers brushing mine briefly. "Thank you," she said quietly. 2 simple words, but heavy with everything she couldn't yet articulate. For standing up for her, for not giving up, for reminding her of her own strength. I didn't answer, just lifted the cup and took a sip, the warmth spreading through me like a promise that we were, finally, okay. The tea tasted slightly bitter, but I didn't mind. It felt real. The night grew colder, and we wrapped ourselves in blankets, watching the world go still. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a car passed, and then nothing but the soft rustle of wind through leaves. The villa's windows glowed faintly behind us, golden and calm, like the heart of something reborn. I thought of all the memories the house held, good and bad, and how it would now begin collecting new ones, quieter, gentler. When Emily finally went back inside, I stayed a while longer, my thoughts drifting. I thought about how love could twist itself into obligation, how kindness could be mistaken for weakness, and how sometimes the hardest thing a parent could do was step back and let their child find their own way through the wreckage. But tonight wasn't about regret. It was about restoration. The kind that doesn't shout or demand recognition, the kind that simply exists, steady and enduring. The stars began to fade, the horizon softening into the first hint of dawn. The world was still, holding that fragile moment between night and morning, between what was and what would be. I could hear the faintest stirrings from inside, Emily moving about, the sound of running water, the gentle clink of dishes. Life returning in small, simple ways. I smiled to myself, knowing that healing never came with grand gestures, but with quiet mornings like this, when the air smelled of jasmine and forgiveness, and something like hope. The sky began to shift, a pale blush spreading across it, and the first bird began to sing, tentative and beautiful, as if reminding us both that even after the longest darkness, there would always be light waiting to rise.